my pleasure now to welcome Sophie Sirtaine. Sophie is CGAP CEO. She's responsible for leading CGAP's operational team throughout the 5-year strategy. And she's going to share some of her reflections from this event today. Thank you so much, Sophie.
No, thank you very much, Aude, the team behind Finequity, and all of you, not just for having me today, but really for participating and making these discussions so interesting. I loved listening to you over the last 2 days, but I'm really delighted to be closing these annual discussions, first and foremost, because we just see enormous value in the Finequity community of practice. And the comments you just shared on the screen just confirm that. I think you see that value too, so that's amazing. But it's really a platform that we convene to allow you to share experiences, define common challenges, discuss emerging good practices, and solve common problems, because we really believe in the importance of knowledge sharing. And I will come back to that as I talk a bit more about what we see as important in the sector today, and how much knowledge sharing is critical to our collective success. But I also really liked what Emmanuel highlighted at the beginning when he spoke, and when he talked about the importance of the financial equity community of practice to spotlight important topics that we can all work on together to advance women financial inclusion and drive collective action. So you have a really important role to play, and we're delighted to be supporting that. Now I want to maybe backtrack a bit. You've been talking a lot about solutions, but I want to backtrack to talk about where we're at in the world today in terms of women financial inclusion, not to bore you with statistics that you know, but really to reflect on what's the journey ahead. So you all know, of course, that 1.4 billion people remain unbanked, and that women lag behind men on all dimensions of access. But the angle that I want to bring to the table today is really that while there has been progress in women's financial globally, and in fact, even significant progress in some countries, in total, it is a good 250 million women that got access to financial services over the last 3 years, if we look at Findex data. But that is nothing compared to the number of women who today remain totally financially excluded, not even thinking about access to other products than just an account, which is about 750 million women. So if we continue at the same pace, it's going to take us at the minimum a decade to close the women financial inclusion gap. And that's probably an overstatement, because it's going to be much harder to reach the next segments of excluded women than it has been so far, because we're talking of women that are more excluded physically, that may live in countries with harder social norms, et cetera, et cetera. So we think that there's a lot that we know already that works, and that needs to continue. And I think you've discussed that a lot over the days, including investing in connectivity to close the digital divide, especially where women live, distributing IDs to all women, digitalizing cash transfers, especially those that women receive, using agent networks. All of this needs to continue, but it will not be sufficient. And we really think that because of gender norms in particular, business as usual will not get there. And much more knowledge sharing will be needed, not just on what we know has worked so far, for which knowledge sharing across countries that haven't progressed yet is useful, is necessary. But we know that, or we at CGAP think that we're going to need much more intentional, multi-dimensional efforts by both the public and the private sector to address really systematically at country level the remaining barriers to women financial inclusion, while taking into account the existing gender norms in these countries. And as you discuss that, this will be even more important, as you discussed over the last 2 days. Closing the women financial inclusion gap will be even more important in the context of climate change, and women's needs really must take center stage as we try to address the climate crisis and as we try to increase climate resilience and climate adaptation. And we know, you've discussed that, so I'm not going to repeat it, but you know that women are both more exposed to climate risk. They're more likely to live in areas that are exposed to climate risk. They're also more vulnerable to the impact of climate change. For instance, girls are more likely to be taken out of school as a result of climate shocks than boys. But we also know, as you've discussed today, that women are typically less equipped with the tools and the financial services they would need to build resilience and adapt, build resilience against these shocks and adapt to these changing circumstances. But by contrast, we know that when women are equipped, they can play a major role in building climate resilience at the household level and beyond. We also know that, reversely, climate change is probably the most real threat to the progress we have made so far on financial inclusion, including for women, because they are, if anything, they are making poor customers riskier and therefore more difficult to serve. And the natural reaction from financial institutions is to stop serving them. So really, this underscores the importance of applying a gender lens to all the work financial institutions and other stakeholders do on climate adaptation and on climate resilience. But so far, way too little has been done. And you all know that very well. But I was really it was really heartwarming to hear all the experiences that you shared yesterday on, for instance, on insurance with a gender lens. And that to me comes back to the value of learning from each other, of sharing knowledge on what has worked or not worked. Sharing knowledge on failure is also useful. But for women's financial inclusion to continue progressing going forward, we will need much more to think about innovative solutions that in specific context will allow us to progress despite gender norms, despite higher costs, etc. And in the case of climate change, it's going to be even more difficult, as you've discussed and as I just discussed, especially because the business case for a financial institution to serve women with a business adaptation, with a climate adaptation product is even lower than for other products, because you don't generate cash flow with climate adaptation, etc. So really, Finequity and its knowledge sharing ability has a fundamental role today. But I want to build on the last thing you were discussing, the importance of data. Because for any such effort to succeed, a much stronger focus on establishing and measuring gender outcomes will be needed. And you might have seen our new strategy, but our new strategy really focuses on the fact that as a community, we really need to set our goals well beyond access or even usage of financial services, and really focus on what we call the utility, that is the practical benefits, the positive outcomes that financial inclusion can generate for women, for other customers, and for communities and beyond. And I think it's really well understood that access and usage of financial services do not guarantee positive impacts on women, on their household, on societies, on economies, or on the environment, as we were discussing. The evidence today shows that the same financial products can have different impact on customers depending on gender, but also depending on context, or depending on the type of product, or depending on the pricing and many other characteristics. So without knowing when financial services work for whom and under what circumstances, none of us, not the policymakers, not the funders, not the financial service providers, will make policies, design projects, or offer services that without they won't be able to ascertain that their work will lead to positive outcomes. And so we really would like to emphasize the importance for all of us to take a totally outcome-focused approach as we do our work. And at CGAP, we're trying to support the community in this effort by really building a conceptual framework on the evidence that we have around the impact that we can aspire to through our work on inclusive finance and how to measure this. And so the data agenda that you just highlighted so well in the last discussion is fundamental to that. You can't get to outcomes if you can't measure. You can generate positive outcome if you first you don't know who you're trying to influence. If women are invisible to providers and policymakers, they can't even try to target them, but even less to generate positive outcomes. So data is fundamental. Data is also fundamental because all the innovations that are going to make a difference to bridge the women financial inclusion gap are going to be data-driven in this world. And you've also discussed that. And this is, as I said, even more important in the case of climate change, where products will need to be designed with impact in mind. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen, because the traditional way of developing financial services, even in the microfinance sector, even for microloans, is not suitable for climate adaptation needs, for instance, as I mentioned earlier. So again, you're spot on with so many of the topics that you've discussed today. Last but not least, and I'll finish with that, it's obvious that innovations that will be successful to close the gender gap, we're on the positive side of things at CGAP. So we believe it is possible that there will be innovations that will use data-driven solutions, go around norms, and help close the gender gap in financial inclusion, and help also women and others with climate adaptation needs. But to be scaled up, they will need financing. And today there is a scarcity of financing for innovations, and especially in emerging markets. There's a vibrant inclusive finance over the course of these discussions to impact positively women's lives. So really delighted that you discussed on this. And I really want to just wish you all good luck in this very noble endeavor, and really hope that CGAP can continue not just supporting your efforts, but also benefiting from hearing about your experiences. So we count on you to be active part of this community of practice. Thanks. It's back to you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye. See you next year.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.